Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The night had that quiet kind of magic, dim golden light spelling from the floor lamp, the faint hum of music playing low, and laughter that kept brushing against something deeper. Our two couples sat around the living room, half drunk on wine and comfort, but mostly on curiosity. My husband's hand rested on my thigh, warm and possessive. Yet his eyes kept drifting, watching, waiting. When her husband leaned closer to pour me another glass, his fingers brushed mine, slow and deliberate. It shouldn't have meant anything, but the way his touch lingered soft, almost testing, sent a flutter straight through my chest. I caught his eyes then, and everything else disappeared. The world around us dimmed. My husband's laughter, her voice, even the clinking of glasses. All I could hear was the rush of my pulse in my ears. His gaze didn't look away. It dared me to keep holding it. My breath caught, and I felt my husband's thumb circle against my knee, as if reminding me he was still there, that he was watching, too. The air thickened between all four of us, too heavy for words, too charged to ignore. A playful comment broke the silence. Something harmless, something ordinary. But no one laughed. Not really. Instead, her husband's smile deepened slow and knowing, like he just stepped into a game none of us admitted we were playing. When I tried to look away, my husband's hand slid higher, coaxing me back into the moment. He whispered, "It's okay. I want to see you. Really see you." I didn't understand what he meant. Not until her husband leaned closer again, his voice low, his breath warm against my ear. Then maybe he should. The words weren't loud, but they carried enough heat to make my heart stutter. The air between us pulsed with unspoken daring, with boundaries trembling. My fingers trembled against the glass. My husband's gaze locked with hers. And somewhere in that thick, electric silence, I knew something was about to break. Something inside all of us. Before I could take another breath, her husband's hand brushed the back of my neck so lightly it almost felt like a promise. And in that heartbeat, my husband whispered, "Let it happen." The glass slipped from my fingers. The music stopped and everything changed. They say every marriage has a rhythm. One you learn, one you live with, one that eventually fades into silence if you stop listening. For us, that silence had been growing for months. My husband and I weren't unhappy. We were just muted. Our routine, her laughter filled a room. His presence commanded it. They made ordinary moments feel like they carried a secret pulse. And somewhere in that glow, my husband found something he'd been missing. And so did I. It started innocently. Game nights, shared dinners, inside jokes that stretched late into the night. My husband and her husband became friends fast, bonded over stories and whiskey. She and I, though, shared glances, ones that lasted just a little too long, as if we were both wondering the same thing. How far could curiosity go before it became confession? Then came that night, the one that changed everything. It wasn't planned, at least not out loud. My husband had mentioned fantasies before, half jokingly, the kind of thing you laugh about until you realize you're not really laughing. What if, he had said once, we stopped pretending we didn't wonder? I never answered him. I didn't know how, but the idea lingered like a secret between us, unspoken yet alive. So, when her husband's hand brushed mine, and my husband didn't pull away, I felt something inside me shift. Not betrayal, not guilt, just a strange reckless permission. The kind that comes when desire and trust meet in the same breath. Her husband had that quiet confidence, not arrogance, just awareness. Every time he spoke, it was with purpose, like he was reading the room, reading me. My husband watched from across the couch, not with anger, but with an intensity that made my skin flush. Maybe this was what he wanted, to see me awaken again. Maybe this was what I needed to be seen. The room buzzed with unspoken things. Her fingers lingered on my husband's arm as she laughed at his story. He looked at her like he was remembering something forgotten. And I sat between the two men, one who knew every inch of me and one who didn't have to because he already understood what I was feeling. We were all smiling, pretending it was just another night. But our hearts knew better. Something had already begun. Quietly, dangerously, beautifully. The air in the room had changed thicker, heavier, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Every small movement carried weight now. A brush of fingertips across a glass, a shift in the couch cushions, a stolen glance that lasted 1 second too long. No one said a word, but every look was a question, and every silence an answer. Her husband leaned back in his seat, confident and calm, his eyes tracing the outline of my face with quiet curiosity. My husband noticed, of course he did. But instead of stopping it, he let it happen. His hand rested on my thigh again, steady but firmer this time, a silent claim. It should have comforted me, but instead it made my pulse race faster. Because when I looked at him, there was something new in his eyes, a mix of control and surrender. Across from us, she laughed at something my husband said, but there was a tremor in her voice. Her hand lingered on his shoulder, fingers curling just slightly, as if testing how far the moment could stretch before it broke. My husband turned toward her, and for the first time, I saw it. That spark, that raw curiosity mirrored back at him. It wasn't just attraction. It was everything they'd both been hiding behind polite smiles and playful teasing. And in that instant, jealousy and desire twisted together inside me. Not ugly, but intoxicating. It was like watching a version of myself I didn't know existed. One that wanted to break the rules just to feel alive again. Her husband shifted closer to me, his voice low. "You look like you're somewhere else," he murmured. "Maybe I am." I whispered back before I could stop myself. My husband's gaze flicked to mine, sharp, unreadable. But instead of pulling away, he leaned into her, whispering something that made her blush. The air vibrated with quiet chaos, longing, confusion, need. The boundaries between us blurred until I couldn't tell where loyalty ended and temptation began. Every heartbeat felt louder, every breath heavier. We weren't saying what we wanted, but our bodies were already confessing it. And in that charged silence, one truth became impossible to ignore. The night wasn't going to end the way it began. The rain had started sometime after midnight, soft at first, then steady, a slow rhythm that filled the silence between us. The others had gone upstairs, claiming exhaustion. But we both knew it wasn't sleep that called them. It was everything unsaid that hung in the air. I stayed behind, pretending to clean up empty glasses while her husband lingered near the window, hands in his pockets, eyes glinting under the soft amber light. "Strange night," he said quietly, his tone calm, but laced with something that made my pulse skip. "Yeah," I breathed, not daring to look at him. "Feels like it's still happening." "Whatever it is," he turned then slowly, deliberately, and took a step closer. My fingers tightened around the rim of a glass just to stop them from trembling. The space between us was small now, but the silence was enormous. I could feel his warmth before he even touched me. The kind of closeness that pulled the truth out of your chest, whether you wanted it or not. He reached out, not to touch, but to brush a strand of hair away from my face. Gentle, careful, almost reverent. That single motion sent a shiver down my spine. "You don't have to pretend," he said softly. "Not with me." "I'm not pretending," I whispered, though the words came out uneven. He smiled slow and knowing. "Then why do you look like you're about to run?" Before I could answer, thunder rolled outside, sharp, echoing, and I flinched. His hand instinctively caught my wrist, holding it just long enough for our eyes to meet. That one touch burned through the air like lightning, and I forgot how to breathe. From the hallway, I heard faint footsteps, my husband's voice calling my name. But neither of us moved. The air between us felt too fragile, too charged, like the pause before a confession. "Do you want me to stop?" he asked, voice low, every syllable deliberate. I should have said yes. I should have stepped away. But all I could do was stare at him, heart pounding, caught between fear and something dangerously close to desire. And before I could decide, the footsteps came closer. The door creaked open. Everything froze. The door creaked open slowly, and there he was. My husband stood in the doorway, half in shadow, his expression unreadable. For a moment, none of us moved. The air felt like glass, fragile and waiting to shatter. Her husband still stood close to me, his hand inches from mine, the tension between us still buzzing like static. My heartbeat drowned out everything else. My husband's eyes flicked from me to him and then back again. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence said everything, the curiosity, the permission, the fear that what he wanted might finally be happening. For weeks, he had teased the idea, testing boundaries with subtle words, late-night fantasies whispered in the dark. But he hadn't imagined it like this, real, raw, breathing in front of him. Her husband stepped back slowly, his voice steady. I wasn't going to cross the line. My husband tilted his head, eyes narrowing. You already did. For a second, I thought he was angry. But then something unexpected, a faint, almost broken smile tugged at his lips. Maybe that's what I wanted, he said. Her husband looked at him, then at me. You sure about that? I thought I was. My husband replied quietly, his voice trembling, until I saw her face. Until I realized she's been starving for something, I stopped giving her. The words hit harder than I expected. My throat tightened. That's not true, I whispered. He looked at me, eyes soft now. It is. You don't look at me the way you used to, but you looked at him that way tonight. The confession hung in the air, sharp, honest, painful. Her husband took a cautious step back. You wanted to watch. You said that. My husband nodded. I did. I just didn't think I'd feel it this much. The honesty stripped us bare. There was no hiding behind polite smiles anymore. What was once curiosity had become something else. Truth tangled and messy. And then another voice broke the moment. Hers. She appeared behind him, robe wrapped around her, eyes wide but calm. Maybe this is what we all needed to see, she said softly. How far we've drifted, how much we've been pretending. No one moved. The storm outside roared louder, lightning flashing through the window like a spotlight on every secret now exposed. My husband looked at her husband, then back at me. If we keep pretending after tonight, we'll lose everything. So what now? I asked, barely breathing. He took a step forward, not to stop me, not to claim me, but to stand beside me. Now, he whispered, we stop hiding. And just as the storm cracked the night open, she reached for his hand. The room filled with silence again, the kind that comes before something irreversible. The storm outside had quieted, but inside everything still felt like thunder. The air was thick with the aftermath of what had just been said, every truth, every tremor of emotion hanging between the four of us like smoke that refused to clear. No one spoke for a moment. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that came after an explosion when everyone was still trying to understand what pieces were left standing. My husband finally broke it. I thought watching you want someone else would make me feel powerful, he said, voice slow, almost shaking. But it just made me realize how long I've ignored what you've been craving. You didn't need permission. You needed attention. I turned toward him, eyes burning. And you think this was about attention? I asked. You're the one who opened that door, who wanted to play with fire just to see if I'd burn. Her husband exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. We were all playing, he said, pretending curiosity was harmless. Pretending none of this meant anything. He looked at me, then at her. But it does, doesn't it? It always did. She stepped closer, her robe trailing lightly behind her, voice steady but heavy. It does, she whispered. But maybe this was what we needed to see what happens when honesty comes too late. The room spun with confessions, the sound of rain tapping on the glass like a metronome for every beating heart. My husband's eyes softened as he looked at me. No anger left, just exhaustion, the kind that comes when you love someone enough to admit your mistakes. He reached out and took my hand hesitantly. "I don't want to lose you," he said. "Not like this. Not because I was too afraid to give you more." I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't pull away. His touch felt real again, fragile, human. Her husband turned toward his wife, eyes glassy. "We crossed lines we can't erase," he said. "But maybe that's the only way to learn where they really are." She nodded, stepping closer until she could rest her head against his shoulder. "Maybe it's time we stop pretending we're perfect," she whispered. The four of us stood there, quiet, raw, connected by the same realization. Love isn't neat, and desire doesn't play by rules. Sometimes it takes breaking everything open to find out what's still worth saving. My husband squeezed my hand, and for the first time in months, I saw warmth in his eyes again. Not lust, not jealousy, something gentler, understanding. The night that began as temptation had become truth. And as the storm outside faded into a soft drizzle, he leaned close and whispered, "Let's start over, just us this time." I nodded, heart trembling, because even after everything, that still sounded like hope. The morning after felt like another world. The storm had passed, leaving the air washed clean. The house still and quiet except for the soft patter of rain dripping from the eaves. The tension that once lived in every corner had dissolved, replaced by something tender, fragile, but real. I woke to find my husband sitting by the window, coffee cup in hand, staring at the gray light filtering through the curtains. For a moment, I just watched him, the man I'd loved, the man I'd almost lost to silence and pride. When he noticed me, he smiled, small, tired, but honest. "Didn't mean to wake you," he said softly. I walked over and sat beside him, our shoulders brushing. "I don't think either of us really slept," I admitted. He chuckled quietly, shaking his head. "No, too much to think about, too much to fix," I added, my voice low. He set his cup down and turned toward me. "I study. We've both made mistakes," he said. "But last night, it showed me something. That the spark between us never died. It just got buried under everything we stopped saying." I felt tears rising, but they weren't sad this time. "Then maybe it's time we start saying the things we were too scared to," I whispered. He reached for my hand, not as an apology, but as a promise. His fingers were warm, steady. "Sure. I don't want to share you," he said quietly. "Not because I'm jealous, but because I finally remember how much I still need you." I leaned against him, feeling the weight of his heartbeat beneath my cheek. It wasn't perfect, but it was us. Real, flawed, and still somehow beautiful. Outside, the sky began to brighten, streaks of gold cutting through the gray clouds. Downstairs, the other couple was leaving quietly, respectfully. When her husband caught my eye one last time, there was no tension left, only understanding. We'd all learned something about love. How fragile it was, how strong it could be when faced with truth. My husband wrapped his arm around me, pulling me closer. "Let's go somewhere," he said. "No plans, no people, just us." "Just us," I repeated, smiling through the tears. He kissed my forehead gently, not a passionate kiss, but a grounding one, full of everything words couldn't say. As the morning light filled the room, I realized something simple but powerful. Love doesn't always break when it's tested. Sometimes it deepens, becoming something stronger, softer, and infinitely more human. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of what came next.